The sun had barely risen over the Naval Academy, and the hallways smelled of wax and disinfectant as Marie moved silently between the polished floors, her worn shoes whispering against the marble, the bucket rattling slightly as she wrung the mop. Her back straight despite the weight of years. Her name tag read Marie, and her eyes carried the calm of someone who had survived storms. The morning was quiet, yet she felt a strange tension in the air, a feeling that this day would not remain ordinary. Across the courtyard, Admiral Royce strode through the corridor, his medals catching the weak light, his steps echoing authority. He was known for precision, for discipline, for seeing through pretenses and weaknesses. Yet today, a rumor had reached him about a janitor with a medal, one that should not have existed on someone cleaning floors, and that thought kept circling as he approached the hall where she worked. Marie noticed him first, tall, crisp, uniform eyes sharp like a hawk. She straightened instinctively. Wiping her hands on her rag, she did not speak. First, people often overlooked her like a shadow, but now his eyes were fixed on the faint shimmer of a medal pinned near her mop cart, an old medal with ribbons faded by time and smoke. His gaze narrowed, as if searching his memory for something that did not belong, and Marie felt her breath tighten, though she kept her face calm. The Admiral stepped closer, his voice low but edged with command. He asked where she got the medal, and for a heartbeat, Marie considered answering simply. But some memories were stitched into that ribbon. Words could not hold, she said softly. It was earned. Sir Not Given, his brow furrowed a flicker of disbelief, mixing with curiosity because medals were symbols of order. And this one bore markings reserved for operations long sealed from casual conversation. He reached for it, his fingers brushing the surface, and his eyes caught the engraving. A name carved into the metal, and he froze. His hand stilled his mind, searching for logic that refused to come. The name was one he had seen before, not on a janitor, but on a classified list from years ago during a rescue mission in hostile waters, a mission that had ended with only fragments reported back to command, the rest buried under silence. And now that same name glinted on the chest of a woman pushing a mop. Marie watched him, recognition flickering in his expression. She had seen that look before in officers who thought they understood war until they met its survivors. She said nothing, though. Inside, her pulse thudded back to the night when smoke choked the air and gunfire lit the sky, when decisions cost lives, and she had carried wounded men through darkness to safety under fire. She remembered the sound of the sea swallowing metal and screams. And now here stood one of its architects, the Admiral said softly. This was impossible. He asked if she was related to the soldier whose name was on the medal. She met his gaze and said, "Not related, sir. That was me." Disbelief warred with fragments of memory. She was too young, or so she seemed, but her eyes told the truth. Those were the eyes of someone who had walked through fire and returned carrying ghosts like unseen scars. He wanted to ask more, but her expression warned him to tread carefully. For a moment, the hallway seemed to stretch the air thick with unspoken truths. He thought of reports that had vanished, commendations never delivered, bodies listed as lost, with no further inquiry and standing before him was living proof that someone had survived against the odds and had done so quietly without recognition. She had chosen to clean floors beneath the emblem that had once sent her into battle, and that choice unsettled him. He told her to follow him to his office. His voice an order, but softer than usual. She hesitated, then nodded, pushing her mop aside. Her hands steady, though her mind spun with the past. The hallway felt longer than usual, as if each step echoed not only on the floor, but through the years back to the night she had saved men she never saw again, a night that might have been the one walking ahead of her now. Inside the office, the walls lined with portraits, medals encased in glass, and folded flags. He gestured for her to sit. She remained standing, eyes scanning the room. Her silence made him uneasy. He reached for a file from a drawer marked classified, yellowed with age. He flipped it open, and there it was, the mission name, the list of personnel, and there too the name. He had seen on her medal marked presumed dead. He looked up at her words coming slow and deliberate. "You were supposed to be gone." She gave a faint smile, one with no amusement. "Only memory sometimes. Sir, the ocean gives back what it takes." She said simply. The weight of it sank into the space between them. He realized that whatever report had been written, whatever truth shaped for history, was a lie built on silence, and now the silence had a face, a voice standing before him as living. Contradiction to everything he believed about control and closure. The Admiral asked what really happened that night, and her eyes darkened, as if the memory still burned behind them. She said some truths should not be spoken in rooms with walls, that if he wanted to know, he would have to follow her to the place where the waves still carried the sound of that night. And he realized with a chill he had just stepped into a story that refused to stay buried. The night had fallen over the academy grounds, casting long shadows across the empty hallways, and the air smelled faintly of rain and polished wood. Marie led the Admiral through narrow alleys and side streets, her steps silent and precise. He followed, struggling to keep pace, every sense alert, because the story was no longer contained in files and medals. It had become alive, and every shadow seemed to carry the memory of a past, some wanted buried forever. She paused at a bridge overlooking the dark river water, reflecting the faint glow of distant city lights. She whispered that the river had been witnessed before, that some truths are carried in currents, not paper. He felt a chill remembering her words, that the mission he thought he understood was only part of a larger hidden operation, and that the men listed as casualties had been rescued in secret, and she had been at the center of it all. The echo of footsteps behind them made him tense, faint at first, then louder, like a drumbeat of warning. Marie did not glance back. She led him twisting through streets and alleys paths. Only she knew the city seemed unfamiliar, because danger had a rhythm tonight, moving unseen yet relentless, and he realized that the people pursuing them would not stop for themselves, but for what they knew and carried with them like fire waiting to ignite. She guided him to a hidden boat, docked among reed shadows, pooling across the water. She whispered instructions for moving silently. The Admiral climbed aboard, feeling the cold of the water seeping through his shoes, aware that each movement could betray them. The river reflected their tension. The stillness was alive, every ripple a warning, and the distant hum of engines confirmed that someone had already begun tracking them, and that the night was far from safe. Marie took the lead, steering the boat through twisting canals with practiced skill, each movement calculated to minimize sound. The Admiral gripped the edges, trying to anticipate the currents and her adjustments, the tension pressing on him as if the air itself weighed heavy with danger. Every shadow along the bank seemed alive, waiting for them to make a mistake. He understood that their survival depended on her instincts, and that hesitation could be fatal. She glanced at him. Finally, eyes sharp and voice steady, she warned that the people after them had resources and would not hesitate to strike. He nodded, understanding that this was no longer a question of uncovering history, but of protecting their lives, and the truths the metal and her memory carried the river beneath them seemed to pulse like a living being, carrying secrets of the past into the present. And he realized the night itself was an accomplice to both danger and revelation. The boat slowed near a warehouse hidden by overgrowth and darkness. Marie instructed him to keep low, her movements shadow-like. The Admiral felt a coil of fear tighten in his chest, each breath deliberate. The warehouse smelled of dust and decay. Every corner seemed a potential trap, and he knew that inside lay the evidence of decades of secrecy that could topple. Careers rewrite history and place them in direct danger if discovered. She returned quickly from scouting, the perimeter whispering that they had been spotted. He felt a cold edge of panic, but trusted her instincts completely. She motioned him to a concealed alcove, the shadows thick around them, the sounds of movement outside growing louder the night. Closing in, carrying the threat of intruders who would not hesitate to kill to protect their secrets, and he realized that the confrontation was unavoidable and would determine whether the truth survived. Marie handed him another envelope, coordinates, and instructions that carried decades of hidden information. He traced the markings, feeling the weight of history in his hands, understanding that the mission he had only known in fragments was now alive and whole, that the files represented survival, courage, and deceit, and that they were holding proof that could not be ignored, and every step from now on would carry life and death consequences. The hum of the city beyond the warehouse seemed distant, unreal. As they approached the last stack of files, she whispered that these contained first-hand accounts, names, and evidence that could validate everything she had told him. The mission had succeeded. The lost men had been rescued, and every lie written in official reports could now be exposed. If they survived the night, he nodded, aware that the first sign of movement outside could trigger a deadly encounter, and that time was slipping away. Suddenly, noises came from the far door, a metallic scrape. The first intruders attempting entry. Marie froze, listening, her eyes scanning the darkness. She whispered that they had been discovered. The Admiral felt the cold sting of panic, but trusted her instincts. She motioned him to a hidden corner, shadows, shifting figures, moving like phantoms, and he understood that the confrontation was inevitable and that the next move would decide the fate of the evidence and their lives. Marie stepped forward, silently confronting the intruders. Her presence calm and commanding, they froze, recognizing experience and authority, and then retreated silently, the night thick with tension, the weight of danger pressing down on every move. The Admiral realized that her mastery of survival was unparalleled, and that the evidence they carried was now within reach. But the pursuit outside had not ended, and every second was a battle. They gathered the remaining files, moving toward the back exit. Marie whispering instructions, the river awaiting them outside the city, silent but alive, every shadow a potential threat, every ripple a warning. He understood that the next moments would determine whether the truth survived or was buried forever, that courage alone would not suffice without trust, coordination, and precision. As they stepped onto the canal, the night wrapped around them, Marie guiding the boat skillfully, the pursuing craft behind them, engines loud, cutting through water. The Admiral gripped the sides, aware that history rested in their hands, that the secrets of the mission and the lives of those involved would either emerge into daylight or vanish forever into shadow, and he realized with a cold certainty that survival depended on the woman beside him, and as they disappeared into darkness, carrying the evidence, the truth, and their own lives, he understood that nothing about this mission would ever be the same again, and that the stories buried for decades were finally awake and moving with purpose. The hidden canal narrowed, and the water dark and still reflected only the faint glow of distant city lights. Marie guided the boat with expert precision, every movement smooth and deliberate, the Admiral gripping the sides, his muscles tense, as if anticipating an unseen strike. The night felt alive with danger, every shadow a possible threat, every ripple in the water a warning. And he realized that the next moments would test them beyond anything they had faced before. She motioned for him to remain low, whispering that the final leg would be the most dangerous. The people after them would not hesitate to strike, and that every second counted. He nodded silently, trusting her instincts completely. The river seemed to pulse beneath them, carrying memory and urgency. Every twist of the channel felt like a countdown to confrontation, and the distant hum of engines behind them grew louder, signaling that time was slipping and danger was closing fast. Suddenly, a flash of movement at the edge of the canal announced the arrival of the pursuing craft. Marie ducked low, keeping the boat steady. The Admiral followed instinctively, and they drifted into a smaller channel nearly invisible to their pursuers. The reeds and overhanging trees swallowed the sound of the motor and muffled their presence. He felt the chill of adrenaline as he realized that any misstep could betray them both, and that the night itself seemed to hold its breath waiting for the outcome. She whispered that the coordinates would lead them to a secure safe house hidden for decades, that the files and recordings inside contained proof of everything she had said, that the mission had succeeded, and that every lie in official reports could now be exposed. Traced the envelope markings with trembling hands, realizing that the truth rested entirely in their survival, and that the people who sought to bury it would not hesitate to destroy them to protect their secrets. The boat approached a concealed dock overgrown with reeds and darkness. Marie guided the Admiral onto solid ground, every step careful, and measured her voice low as she whispered instructions to move silently. He followed, keeping low, every sense alert, aware that the night carried unseen watchers, every shadow a potential enemy, and every sound amplified the tension in the air. The weight of history pressed down on him, and he understood that the final confrontation was imminent. Inside the safe house, the air was thick with dust and old paper, the stacks of documents waiting like dormant explosives. Marie handed him envelopes with coordinates and instructions. He traced the markings, understanding that each file represented lives risked and saved, that the medal he had, once held lightly, now symbolized decades of hidden courage and survival, and that what they were holding could destroy lies built over years or validate the heroism long ignored. Suddenly, noises from the far door drew their attention. The first intruders, attempting entry. Marie froze her eyes, scanning the darkness. She whispered that they had been discovered. The Admiral felt panic spike but trusted her instincts completely. She motioned him to a hidden corner, shadows shifting figures appearing like ghosts, and he understood that the confrontation would determine whether the truth survived or was buried forever. Marie stepped forward, confronting the intruders silently, her presence commanding. They hesitated, recognizing authority born of experience and survival, and then retreated into darkness. The tension remained thick, the night holding its breath around them. The Admiral realized that her skill and courage were unparalleled, that every move had been deliberate and calculated, and that the Files they carried were now within reach, but the pursuit outside was relentless, and would not relent until the evidence and witnesses were neutralized. They gathered the remaining envelopes and moved toward the back exit, Marie whispering instructions. Every step deliberate, the canal awaiting them outside, silent but alive, every shadow a potential threat, every ripple a warning. He understood that the night could end in triumph or disaster, depending on their skill coordination and trust the river. Carried them forward like an accomplice, their hearts pounding, every movement a matter of survival. The pursuing craft closed in behind them, engines loud cutting through the water. The Admiral gripped the sides, aware that each moment could be there. Last, Marie guided the boat, expertly weaving through narrow passages hidden from sight. He realized that the metal and the files were more than symbols. They were proof that courage and survival could not be erased, and that the night carried both, peril and vindication in equal measure. As they approached a bridge crossing another channel, Marie paused, scanning the edges, the water reflecting city lights. She whispered that this bridge had once been a route for escape during the mission and would serve them again. He nodded, understanding that history was repeating itself in unexpected ways, and that every decision now could determine the outcome of decades of hidden truths, and that the people pursuing them would exploit any hesitation. Suddenly, a shadow appeared at the edge of the canal, moving with lethal precision. The Admiral froze, ready to confront the threat. But Marie returned from the reeds, positioning herself between him and the intruder, her stance calm and confident, her eyes sharp and focused. The figure hesitated, recognizing an authority that was invisible yet undeniable, and then retreated silently. He realized that her mastery of survival was unmatched, and that every move she had made to survive the past now protected them both. They regrouped at a concealed dock near a warehouse, Marie guiding him carefully, the night heavy with tension. Every step calculated, the weight of responsibility pressing down. He understood that the files they carried represented decades of hidden truth, and that the people who wanted them buried would stop at nothing to retrieve or destroy them. She whispered that the final steps would test them more than anything before. Inside the warehouse, the air stale, dim light illuminating. Stacks of documents and recordings, proof of missions erased from history. Marie handed him envelopes and coordinates. He traced the markings, every name a life risked or saved, every fact a step closer to revealing truth. The night seemed to pulse around them, as if aware that revelation was near, and he understood that nothing about this mission would ever be the same again. Suddenly, noises from the far door, a metallic scrape, the first intruders attempting entry. Marie froze, her eyes scanning. The darkness, she whispered that discovery was inevitable. The Admiral felt panic spike but trusted her instincts. She motioned him to a concealed alcove, shadows, shifting figures appearing like ghosts, and he understood that the confrontation would determine whether the truth survived or was buried forever. Marie confronted the intruders silently, her presence commanding. They froze, recognizing authority born of experience and survival, and then retreated, the night thick with tension. The Admiral realized her skill and courage unmatched, that every move deliberate, and that the files they carried were within reach, but pursuit outside continued relentless, every second critical. They gathered the remaining files, moving toward the back exit. Marie whispering instructions, the canal awaiting outside, silent, but alive, every shadow, a threat, every ripple, a warning. He understood that the night could end in triumph or disaster, depending on their skill coordination and trust the river carried them forward like an accomplice, hearts pounding, every move survival. The boat cut through the canal shadows, swallowing them as the pursuing craft faltered behind Marie, maneuvering expertly. The Admiral gripped the edges, aware that history rested. In their hands, the files and metal proof of courage and survival that could expose decades of lies. He realized that the night itself carried both danger and vindication, and that every breath counted toward life or death. And as they disappeared, into darkness, carrying the evidence, the truth, and their own lives. He understood that nothing about this mission would ever be the same again, that the stories buried for decades were finally awake and moving with purpose, and that the past had caught up with them in full force.